I could listen to that all day. I was first introduced to that tune by Nina, who found it on that album Live in Melbourne that I've been working my way through during the opening music of our shows. It's just a real favorite of ours. I've introduced it to so many people that weren't familiar with it before. It's now entered the liturgy at several synagogues here in LA. It's awesome. That's the Rova Chuppah Nigun by Rabbi Shlomo Katz. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together to do a learning on a Monday evening? Yehuda in Florence, South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in Missouri, Stephen in Oklahoma, Pam in Tennessee, Paul in Chicago, Patrice in Utah, Paula in the Great Northwest, James in Indianapolis, Sharon in New Jersey, Gisette in Colorado, over there on the YouTube side, Michael in Scranton, and Marjorie saying shalom from Atlanta, right, Marjorie? I think I could be wrong. How's everybody doing? Where am I? Wanted to share with you, I just picked up this book. My friend Rabbi Shimon Kraft recommended it to me, The Enemy Within. It's a book, I think it's one of the last books, certainly a later book of Rabbi Abraham Twersky. A Hasidic rabbi and also an MD. You've heard me share stories and teachings in his name many times. He was a clinical doctor engaged in treating people, particularly with substance abuse. And so he just was a real expert in the way that people lie to themselves in order to get what they want. And that really makes him an expert in the Yetzer Hara, which not all of us are battling substance abuse and substance addiction, but all of us will, from time to time, engage in behavior that is wrong and that we know is wrong, and we do it anyway, right? And so what are we doing? We're battling the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. What are we battling with it? What are we using what is our armor? What is our weapon in battling the Yetzer Hara? It's the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination. This is an ongoing battle all the time, and it's especially apropos now in these final days before Rosh Hashanah and the days of awe between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This is the time that we examine our deeds, and we want to think carefully in the same way that an athlete, after a game, a match, a round of whatever his sport is, he'll sort of debrief himself and think about, what went right that I can do more of and what went wrong that I need to work on in my performance. And we're really thinking about that over the past year. What went right and why did it go right? What went wrong and why did it go wrong? It's important to respect the Yetzer Hara, right? That evil inclination in us. First of all, it has various manifestations. It's very wily and cunning. It's very powerful. And there's nothing simple about it. So I was just reading the first chapter of this book. The whole chapter is great. But I just want to read a little bit to you. So first of all, Rabbi Twersky is going to say that there's various aspects of the Yetzer Hara. There's an inner and an outer, right? So that inner aspect of the Yetzer Hara is those animal drives, right? So those same kinds of drives that we share with animals, hunger, greed, lust. I want what I want when I want it. I have an urge for it. Why should I be denied? I want that thing. I'm going to get it, right? And there's a kind of outer aspect of the Yetzer Hara, and this is what is often associated with Satan, right? So Satan is not some kind of, ruler of the underworld, devil, demon, etc. Satan is an angel who is tasked by God with the, not undesirable job. It's not like Satan chose this job. He may not like this job, but it's a job that God gave him to act as the adversary or the prosecutor, right? And part of being the prosecutor and saying, to God, look at these people, look at the way that they misbehave, and there's no law against entrapment, right? So cops can't entrap us. They can't create a crime in order to entrap people into doing it. They're only supposed to, even undercover cops can only catch you doing a crime that you were already engaged in. Satan doesn't have such a rule. So he will create crimes for us to engage in, as it were. And Rabbi Twersky says that he will borrow a term that is used by people recovering from alcoholism, and they say, we must be aware that alcohol is our enemy, cunning, baffling, and powerful. He's ascribing those attributes and adjectives to the Yetzer Hara and to this outer aspect of the Yetzer Hara. And it's this idea like when we justify behaviors that we know are wrong, that are transgressions, that violate precepts of the Torah, etc., and we come up with, fantastic, intellectually logical, provable, systems of thought to justify doing what we want to do, right? And this is that kind of outer aspect of the Yetzer Hara coming to work. And so then Rabbi Twersky cites Rabbi Yitzhak Blazer, known as Rabbi Itzela of Petersburg, who states that whereas the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara are equal in strength, there's a significant difference between them. The Yetzer Hara operates spontaneously, always active, always working on us. The Yetzer Tov, the body's cravings do not have to be activated. They're always ready to go and raging. The Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, however, exists in potential. It must be activated in order to be functional. And this is why the Talmud says that a person must provoke the Yetzer Tov to battle against the Yetzer Hara. While the Yetzer Hara's strength and tactics are formidable and constitute a major challenge, we should realize that we will have divine assistance in subduing it. Furthermore, God will do the lion's share of the work, but we must initiate it. In other words, in battling against your inclinations and urges that are self-destructive, you will receive help from God if you ask for help from God. A man described his internal struggles as, I have two dogs inside of me, constantly fighting with each other. Which one wins, he was asked. Whichever one I feed, he responded. We can nourish the Yetzer Tov, or we can nourish the Yetzer Hara. Whichever one we feed will triumph. And Rabbi Simcha Zissel cites the verse when Moses saw the burning bush, I will turn aside and look at this great light, Exodus 2:22, upon which the Midrash says, Rabbi Yochanan said that Moses took 3 steps toward the bush. God said, because you made the effort to see, I will reveal myself to you. If you look for God in this world, you will see God in this world. If you don't look for God in this world, you don't leave a crack through which the light can get in. Moses' incomparable greatness began with just the minutest effort. This, said Rabbi Simcha Zissel, is what is meant by the Midrash. God says, open for me a passageway like the eye of a needle, and I will open for you portals that can be traversed by wagons. That's from the Midrash on the Song of Songs. And Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk commented, the Kotzker Rebbe, yes, an opening as tiny as the eye of a needle is all that is necessary to invoke God's assistance. But the opening must penetrate the personality through and through. It cannot be superficial. You can't just pay lip service to the battle against the Yetzer Hara. You have to engage in it. We can achieve the upper hand in the battle against the Yetzer Hara by taking even a tiny step in the right direction, but it must be taken with the utmost sincerity. Thank you, Rabbi Twersky, for those inspiring words today. And with those in mind, let's blow the shofar. We are in Elul. We're past the midway point. Rosh Hashanah is less than 2 weeks away. Let's get to our daf. We are holding on page 47, daf Mem Zayin. Here in Tractate Sukkah, this is the 7th volume of the Talmud. We're studying the laws of Sukkot. We're in the 4th chapter of 5. And today we'll be talking about Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly. The 8th day of assembly, meaning the 8th day of Sukkot. But it is not Sukkot. It is not Sukkot. It's a big contradiction in terms here in the Torah. It's called the 8th day of assembly, after the 7 days of Sukkot. This is the 8th day, but it is not Sukkot. It is its own holiday. What is its nature? So this is spelled out in Leviticus, the book of Leviticus 23:36, which says, for a 7-day period, you shall bring a fire offering to the Lord. So we've already been talking about the practices of Sukkot. And then it says in the same verse, on the 8th day, it shall be a holy occasion for you, and you shall bring a fire offering to the Lord. It is a day of detention or abstention. You shall not perform any work of labor. It is unlike the intermediate days of Sukkot where you can do some work. It is a full-fledged festival like the first day of Sukkot or like Shabbos, except that you can cook on a festival. But this 8th day, known as Shemini Atzeret, 8th day of assembly, is its own festival. What is its nature? According to Rashi, God says to Israel, I have detained you to remain with me. This is analogous to a king who invited his sons to feast with him for a certain number of days. And when the time came for them to leave, he said, my sons, please stay with me just one more day, for it is difficult for me to part from you. Similarly, after the 7 days of Sukkot, God detains Israel for one extra holy day, and that's why I called it God's VIP after party. Okay, so we're picking this up at the bottom of page 46 on the B side. Apropos the matter of the 8th day of assembly in the diaspora, meaning outside of the land of Israel, and generally we've been talking quite a bit about the fact that in ancient times, when the new months were commenced, because witnesses came before the Sanhedrin to say, we saw that little sliver of the new moon, so that it's waxing again. This is the first day of the month, and they would declare the month has begun. And then everyone would hear about that in Jerusalem and within a certain distance from Jerusalem. But in ancient times, they didn't have, mass communication, and it would take quite a bit of time for the word to get out that the new month had been declared. And that's why outside of Israel, something like the first day of Sukkot is a 1-day festival. In Israel, it's a 2-day festival outside of Israel because of that uncertainty. Once you're talking about this uncertainty, now this creates a problem because Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, it might be its own holiday, but it's counted as a number of days from when Sukkot began. So if outside of Israel there was uncertainty about when Sukkot actually began, did the Sanhedrin declare that a new month had begun or not at the beginning of the month at Rosh Hashanah or not? They might not have heard even 2 weeks later when Sukkot began. And so from where are they going to count the 8th day of assembly? And if they didn't get the right word on which day was the first day of the month, well, what if it's still Sukkot when they think it's the 8th day of assembly? And how does that affect the manner in which they observe that festival? That's what we're talking about. So apropos the matter of the 8th day of assembly in the diaspora, the Gemara notes, Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shelah, said in the name of Rav, outside of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, on the 8th day, with regard to which there is uncertainty, that it might actually be the 7th day of Sukkot rather than the 8th day, its status is like that of the 7th day with regard to the mitzvah, the commandment of Sukkah, meaning of residing, of dwelling in the Sukkah. And it is like that of the 8th day with regard to the blessing. In other words, in the grace after meals, in the Kiddush, and in the Amidah, the standing prayer, the 18 blessings, the main prayer that we say in each prayer service, in each of these three prayers, right, the grace after the meals, the Kiddush with which we sanctify the day at the beginning of the day, which starts the night before, and during the three prayer services of that day, we have a special addition whenever there's a festival. During Sukkot, we mention that this is the time of our rejoicing. During the 8th day, we mention the 8th day itself, right? We mention Sukkot during the days of Sukkot, and we mention the 8th day, Shemini Atzeret, specifically, right? So in the Kiddush, in the grace after the meals, and in the Amidah, you need to mention Shemini Atzeret. And so they're saying, well, if we're not sure whether it really is the 8th day or not, what are we going to do about that? Well, according to this view, Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, we're going to dwell in the Sukkah just in case we're still commanded to dwell in the Sukkah because it might be the 7th day. But because we think it's the 8th day, we're going to mention the 8th day in our prayers. Its status is like that of the 8th. Rabbi Yochanan said, so he's disagreeing with Rav Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rav, Rabbi Yochanan said, its status, the 8th day, is like that of the 8th day, both with regard to this, the mitzvah of Sukkah, and to that, the blessing. And the Gemara explains, everyone, even Rabbi Yochanan, agrees that we reside in the Sukkah on the 8th day, with regard to which there is uncertainty that it might be the 7th day. Where they disagree is with regard to whether or not we recite the blessing over residing in the Sukkah. As we discussed yesterday, we say the blessing every day over residing in the Sukkah, that we're fulfilling our obligation to reside in the Sukkah by taking our meals there, etc. We say that blessing every day, but you don't say the blessing on the 8th day. According to this view, you dwell in the Sukkah on the 8th day, but you do so without a blessing. And this is due to the uncertainty outside of the land of Israel. In Israel, there shouldn't be uncertainty. They would get the word in time whether the new month had been declared, so this would not be an issue. According to the one who says that the status of the 8th day is like that of the 7th day with regard to the commandment of residing in the Sukkah, we also recite the blessing to reside in the Sukkah, the blessing over residing in the Sukkah. However, according to the one who says that its status is like that of the 8th day, both with regard to this and that, to whether or not we reside in the Sukkah, whether we say the blessing, and whether we add those additional words about Shemini Atzeret in those other prayers, according to that view, we do not recite the blessing. We dwell in the Sukkah, but we don't recite the blessing. Rav Yosef said, take the statement of Rabbi Yochanan, that on the 8th day, outside of Eretz Yisrael, one does not recite the blessing about residing in the Sukkah. Take that teaching in your hand. In other words, adopt it as your practice. As Rav Huna bar Bizna and all the prominent scholars of the generation happened to visit a Sukkah on the 8th day, with regard to which there was uncertainty that it might be the 7th day. And what did they do? They sat in the Sukkah, but they did not recite the blessing. And the Gemara suggests, well, perhaps the reason that they did not recite the blessing is that they hold in accordance with the opinion of the one who said, once he recited the blessing on the first festival day, he does not recite it again on subsequent days. As we learned yesterday, that is not the law, but it was the view of one of the sages. And so the reason they didn't say a blessing was because they'd already said the blessing on an earlier day, and they didn't need to say the blessing, but it wasn't because they don't say the blessing on the 8th day. And the Gemara answers, that is not the reason that they did not recite the blessing, as the sages learned through tradition that these particular sages who sat in the sukkah that day were coming from the fields where they had been herding their flocks, and that was the first time during the festival that they sat in a sukkah. And Rabbi Yochanan said that one recites the blessing, and so, we'll go on in a moment. So what is the law? Outside of the land of Israel, one eats in the sukkah on the 8th day of assembly, as there is uncertainty whether it is the 7th day or the 8th day. However, the blessing to reside in the sukkah is not recited. In Kiddush and in the prayers of the 8th day, in the Kiddush and in prayers, the 8th day of assembly is mentioned, and one recites the blessing of time, the Shechechianu, indicating that it is an independent festival, right? We've learned already that you only say Shechechianu on the first day. You say Shechechianu on the first day of Sukkot. You say Shechechianu on the first day of Passover, on the first day of Hanukkah. So why would you say Shechechianu on the 8th day of Sukkot? Because the 8th day of Sukkot is not Sukkot. It is a separate festival called Shemini Atzeret. And most authorities rule in this matter in accordance with the conclusion of the Gemara here. However, there are many different opinions among the halakhic authorities, and correspondingly, there are many different customs. The law is always the same, but there are little nuances. Some eat an insubstantial or incomplete meal in the sukkah on the 8th day, right? So because there was uncertainty in the past, now the calendar is fixed, we know, but still, because there was uncertainty in the past, they will eat in the sukkah on the 8th day, but they won't say the blessing, and some people don't even really want to have a full meal. They want to just sort of tip the hat, as it were, give a nod to the custom as it used to be, but they're not going to eat a full meal in the sukkah. That's some people. Others eat in the sukkah only during the day and not at night. Many authorities rule that one should not sleep in the sukkah that night, the night of Shemini Atzeret, and that is the prevailing custom. In all these matters, everyone should follow his local custom. If you're not sure what your local custom is, ask your rabbi. Then Rabbi Yochanan said that one recites the blessing, who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this time, the Shechechianu, on the 8th day of the festival, as the 8th day is a festival distinct from Sukkot, and one does not recite the blessing of time on the 7th day of Passover because it is not a festival distinct from Passover. Right? The first day of Passover is a full-fledged festival day. All the laws of Shabbos apply. You can't do any kind of work. You can cook because you can cook on a festival. In every other way, you can't do any work. During the intermediate days of Passover, you can do some work. On the 7th day of Passover, and outside of Israel, the 7th and 8th day of Passover, you can't do work again. It is a full-fledged festival, but it is not a separate festival in and of itself, like Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, is at the end of Sukkot. That's its own festival. 7th and 8th day of Passover are full-fledged festival days, but they are part of Passover. Skipping a little, Rav Papa said, and another reason why the 8th day of Sukkot is considered a distinct festival. Here, with regard to the additional offering sacrificed on the 8th day of assembly, it is written at Numbers 29:36, and you shall present a burnt offering, an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord, one bull. And there, with regard to the additional offering sacrificed on the first day of Sukkot, it is written, Numbers 29:13, and you shall present a burnt offering, an offering made by fire, a sweet savor unto the Lord, 13 bulls. And on each subsequent day, one bull fewer is sacrificed, 12 on the second day, 11 on the third day, and so on, until 7 are sacrificed on the 7th day of Sukkot. If the 8th day the 8th day after Sukkot began were part of the festival of Sukkot, the additional offering on that day should have included 6 bulls. The fact that it includes only 1 bull indicates that it is a distinct festival. Skipping a little bit more. And I'm actually, what we're going to be learning on this page is somewhat brief today. So if you got questions or comments, get them in now. The sages said to Rabbi Yehuda, But don't the numbers of all the animals eventually decrease on the 8th day, as on the other days 2 rams and 14 sheep are sacrificed, and on the 8th day it is 1 ram and 7 sheep? And Rabbi Yehuda said to them, the 8th day of assembly is a festival in and of itself, as just as the 7 days of the festival of Sukkot require an offering, and a song sung by the Levites, and a blessing unique to the festival of Sukkot, and there is a mitzvah of staying overnight in Jerusalem after the first festival day, so too, on the 8th day, the 8th day requires an offering and a song sung by the Levites and a blessing unique to the 8th day of assembly, and there is a mitzvah of staying overnight in Jerusalem at its conclusion. So what? Is it not that the blessing mentioned is the blessing of time in support of the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan? And the Gemara rejects this possibility. No, the blessing here that is being mentioned is the grace after meals and the Amidah prayer, where mention is made of Shemini Atzeret and not of Sukkot. Therefore, there is no support for the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that one recites the blessing of time on the 8th day of assembly. They derive that from another source, but that in fact is the law. We say Shechechianu on Shemini Atzeret. Just 2 paragraphs to go, and then I'm coming to questions and comments. What halachic conclusion was reached concerning the blessing of time? Rav Nachman said, one recites the blessing of time on the 8th day of the festival of Sukkot. And Rav Sheshet said, one does not recite the blessing of time. You can see they argued about this quite a bit. And on the 8th day of the festival. And the Gemara concludes, and the halacha is that one does recite the blessing of time on the 8th day of the festival. We do say Shechechianu. And the Gemara notes, it was taught in a baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman. The 8th day is a festival in and of itself with regard to the matter of Pei Zayin Reish Kuf Shin Bet. And this is an acronym that helps you remember all of the things that are necessary to do on these festival days. This is an acronym for Payas. The Pei is Payas, a lottery in and of itself. I.e., there was a new lottery performed on that day to determine which priests will sacrifice the offerings that day, and the order established on Sukkot does not continue. They might have had a lottery at the beginning of Sukkot that established which priests would serve on which days of Sukkot. Come Shemini Atzeret, a new lottery for which priests will do what on that day in the temple. The second letter of the acronym is Zion, the blessing of time, Zeman, i.e., the Shechechianu, reciting who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this time. That blessing, we say it on Shemini Atzeret. The letter Reish, this stands for Regal, a festival. Right, so the 3 regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, they're called regalim because you walk up to Jerusalem. Right, you use your legs to walk up to Jerusalem. And there is no mitzvah to sit in the sukkah. This is the kuf, an offering, a korban, in and of itself, as there are special offerings for Shemini Atzeret that are not tied to the pattern of offerings established during Sukkot. That the offerings given on Shemini Atzeret are not a continuation of the numbers sacrificed on Sukkot, but there is a new calculation. The shin stands for shira, a song in and of itself, since the psalms recited by the Levites in the temple as the offerings are sacrificed on Shemini Atzeret are not a continuation of the psalms that were recited during Sukkot. And finally, a blessing, the bracha, the word bracha is the final word in this acronym, a blessing in and of itself as the addition to the third blessing of the grace after meals and to the Amidah prayer is phrased in a manner different from the additions recited on Sukkot. Rather, we mention Shemini Atzeret itself. Okay, that concludes what we're going to be learning today. Tomorrow, we'll open on page 48 with Mishna number 3 of chapter 4, with God's help. Let's see if we have questions or comments today. this is not coming through to me. Let me check comments. Sharon, so why is Shemini Atzeret referred to as Man Simchatenu, just like Sukkot in the Kiddush, Amida, and Birkat Hamazon, and not given a separate designation? I think what it is it is the season of our rejoicing. In that sense, it's the 8th day of assembly. It is connected to Sukkot. But even though we also call it the season of our rejoicing, we mention Shemini Atzeret. We don't say Sukkot and the season of our rejoicing. We say, Shemini Atzeret, and it is the season of our rejoicing. So I think the fact that we say season of our rejoicing is because there is a little bit of that ambiguity. I mean, the bottom line is it's a festival in and of itself, but its name is the 8th day of assembly. So it's connected to Sukkot, and that's why I think Rashi does that beautiful little, anthropomorphization of how God views us during that week, and then says, stay with me one more day because it is painful for me to part from you, right? It is painful for me to part from you after the week-long party that we've had together, so stay an additional day. So it's tied to Sukkot, and yet it has also that aspect of being a separate holiday. Okay, I think that is all. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Great to be learning with you. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 48. And we're getting near the end, by the way. Tractate Sukkah, I think, has 56 pages. 56 pages. Tomorrow we're on 48. You do the math. Take care and have a great night.